Hey there, everyone, and welcome back to the Banners Fly Forever football show. It is our post NFL draft show, probably one of the bigger ones of the year. It's not very often, Dan, that I think we get shows where you have like an unbelievable amount of information to dig through and to pack it all into one show. We could go, I mean, you and I can talk about like one event happening in the NFL for like, hours. So this could take days to talk about the entire draft. So we're definitely gonna have to narrow it down tonight. But I know, the draft was kind of an interesting weekend. There were some surprises, some teams that are all claiming that they got better, not some, all teams that are claiming, yeah, we got better this weekend.
Hey,
Um,
everyone is undefeated.
exactly,
No
undefeated.
one, no
They're
one's has
0-0.
lost.
If you go to Tankathon now, everybody's in line for the top pick in the draft, and everybody's in line to be the Super Bowl winner next year. So, but what were your first impressions, I guess, from draft weekend, Dan?
Oh man, it was such a crazy weekend, and we kind of say it over and over again. Us, we work in football, we work in the scouting community. The draft is so big for us just to see how our evaluations relate to the NFL.
Yeah,
We'll get to talk about like players like Cooper DeJean, Johnny Newton, all those players that fell out of the first round. Tyler Guyton, players that we thought were fringe first rounders, how
right,
they
right.
were into the first round. It's an amazing both confirmation bias on your process,
Yeah,
but at the same time it makes you rethink your process as we already prepare for 2025, which
right.
I don't know about you, but I'll probably start taking notes sometime next week on that class.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree with you completely. I think the thing that always sticks out to me once the draft starts and once the picks start coming in is just that realization rolls over every single year where I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. Like I don't have all the information and everybody's draft board's a little different.
Yeah.
That you can never really know how the picks are going to lay out and how they're going to go because teams are valuing players in different ways. They're trying to build a roster in different ways. This isn't, not to like knock the NBA, but this isn't the NBA where it's like there's five guys out there most of the time, maybe seven total guys play. There are tons of different players and positions that you want to build in different ways with different strategies in the NFL. So the board falls very differently every single year than I kind of think we all predict. So it is a mix of like, am I scouting right? And then it's a mix of what am I not seeing or hearing that is actually going on behind closed doors? And I think that kind of segues us right into the biggest talking point probably of I think the whole draft, which was the Atlanta Falcons at pick number 8 taking Michael Penix. A pretty shocking pick for a lot of reasons, but I mean, what was your reaction? I think I'm assuming it's the same as mine, where like my jaw just dropped basically when it happened.
I remember I was at work, watching the draft, and I remember I verbally said out loud, "Oh baby, here we go."
Yep.
Because we've covered drafts in the past, and you get your chalk one, your chalk two, and then like once you get that first moment, like for us last year was when the Texans traded it up
Yep.
to number 3 to get Will Anderson. That's like, all right, we spent 4 months saying A, B, C, D are going to happen, and now Z
Yeah.
happened.
Exactly.
Buckle up. This is when the ride starts, as
Exactly.
the Joker says, this is when the fun begins.
Exactly.
And so that was my first reaction. Was like, oh boy, here we go. The draft is here. It started. This is chaos mode, like you always like to say. We went into last year's draft, but
Yep.
then actually thinking about the Atlanta Falcons and also the teams behind the Falcons and how it affects them, and it's such a weird disconnect from.
Mhm.
I think I was higher on Penix than you were
Sure.
as we came to an end of the evaluation
I
process.
think that's
So
true. Yep.
I don't have a problem with Penix being a top 10 pick.
Hmm.
That part I had no problem with. The problem
Sure.
was the roster construction and the offseason we saw the Atlanta Falcons go
Right.
through,
Right.
with the signing of the Kirk Cousins and all that guaranteed money and all that stuff. So for me, it was nice to see that being so high on Penix was justified because because it wasn't just Atlanta, and we'll get into it, but Raiders, Seahawks, Saints were all trying to trade up.
Sure.
So it was nice getting that justification, like, hey, my process was correct on that. But then immediately it's like, what is Terry Fontenot doing, and how much longer will he have a job with Arthur Blank?
Yeah. I mean, I don't really want to mince words with this one. I think it's one of the worst picks I've ever seen in the draft. Like I with the process that went into the offseason before that pick, it's one of the craziest picks I've ever seen. And this is nothing against Michael Penix at all. You were probably a little higher than I was for where he was going to get drafted, but he was right in the mix with McCarthy for me of being like the fourth QB. So it wasn't like outrageous for him to be the fourth QB selected. He was the fourth QB, though. I had three QBs definitely ahead of him. And going at pick 8 was a little surprising, but to Atlanta, it was just stunning. Like, you guarantee $100 million contract to a guy who's going to be 36 years old this year. And you're doing that because you want to go win. Like, there's no question when you make that deal that it's, we want to go win and we want to be in the playoffs and we want to compete to try to be, champions of the NFC, go to the Super Bowl. Like, that is what that deal is. There is no way, shape, or form around that. You're a 7-10 team last year with really bad quarterback play the whole year. You had the worst strength of schedule last year, and you were still an average defense, like 15th in the league in points surrendered. This opportunity to go out and either trade back a couple of spots and still get a defensive player, or just take your top defensive player on the board to shore up your defense, was right there for them. And you've spent, Fontenot himself has spent the 4th pick on Kyle Pitts, a year later, the 8th pick on Drake London, a year later, the 8th pick on Bijan Robinson. And he wants to leave and explain to everyone that we're doing this because we don't expect to be in the top 10 again. All you've been is in the top 10. And like, if you think that Kirk Cousins is the reason why you won't be, well, again, it's a 36-year-old quarterback coming off an Achilles injury. Like, if he gets hurt and Penix is a rookie, you could be in the top 10 again next year. Like, the justification is just outrageous. You could have spent the same money you spent on Kirk Cousins on 2 defensive ends, 2 of the top defensive ends in free agency, and then drafted Michael Penix.
I think
any
that
of that would have been better.
That was the first conversation you and I had. Was, not even talking about the pick of Penix himself, but like just like the roster construction and the approach to the offseason. Like you said, because we were talking about, Daniel Hunter was out there, Jonathan Grenard was out there. Like, you could have signed both those players,
right,
and immediately improve that defensive unit. And so, because that's the funny thing is, like, let's replay this draft,
sure,
but let's not do the Kirk Cousins signing. Let's go sign those defensive players, and then let's draft Penix at 8. And what are we doing here saying? We're saying great offseason by the Atlanta Falcons, even though they have a rookie quarterback. He's one of the most experienced rookie quarterbacks to enter this league this year.
Yep, going to be 24.
He's a great day one starter, and it immediately puts them in playoff contention. Like, how much does this conversation change? It's crazy.
So different. Yeah. So different. It goes from being what I just said, one of the worst picks ever, to being like, that's a really solid pick. I'm really interested to see how this plays out.
Because you know what? The thing that everybody would be saying Monday morning is kudos to Atlanta for sticking and picking and not trading up.
Absolutely.
That is
they
what
had their guy.
They
had their guy. They zeroed in on him and they took him. Like, that would be totally sensible at that point. But I mean, it's not the same situation at all as Green Bay in the past. Like, that was the one that everybody tried to bring up. Like, and let's even get beyond the fact that it was the 8th pick versus like Rodgers and Love being in the 20s. That's one thing. But both Favre and Rodgers were established quarterbacks where they were playing already. You are bringing Kirk Cousins in. He does not know the locker room. He does not know all the players. He doesn't even know the facility yet. And now he has to go try to win a team over that he should be starting over the rookie that was just drafted, when all he was looking when he signed a contract was for somebody to commit to him. The Vikings have been wishy-washy for years. They had a team that came out and said, like, we're going to give you $100 million guarantee. We want you to come in and have the twilight of your career with us. Let's go win games and win championships. And they draft this guy at 8. And then they come out and they're like, yeah, if Kirk is really good and he has to sit 2, 3, 4, 5 years, that's fine. If he sits for 4 years, he's going to be 28 years old and you're going to have to pay him a contract. Like, it doesn't make any sense at all. It's the craziest line of just, I feel like they're jumping through hoops here to try to justify doing it. If you love the player, you love the player. I get it. You want to get that player, but it just doesn't make sense when that guy was, when that information was out there of who he was prior to signing Cousins that you still went through with spending all that money and signing Cousins. It's just it's so wild. It's like the wildest picks. I know, like last year when the Lions took Gibbs at like 12, our jaws dropped and we're like, wow, that seems a little high. But I mean, like, it's not a problem with Penix going 8. It is just the team he went to. It makes almost no sense. Like, anybody that I was listening to, they were like, do they know something? Is Cousins going to be suspended? Is like, everybody was like, what is the scenario here that would have justified this? And I'm still trying to figure it out, really. But yeah, I mean, we could.
And
Sorry, go ahead.
the crazier thing is, like, then you hear reports of Seattle Raiders and the Saints trying to trade up. So now you're not only talking about the 8th pick, you're talking about the 8th pick plus whatever, whatever that trade package would have been, which, if it's for the quarterback, is probably going to involve a 25 first. So
Right.
now you're just talking about the opportunity cost of taking Michael Penix Jr.
Yep, absolutely. I don't know. There's so many reasons against doing what they did, but they did it. So, I mean, now we find it out. I mean, if it pans out and, Cousins has 2 years left and he's not playing all that hot and Penix comes in and he becomes a franchise quarterback for them, no one's going to look like an idiot there. But I mean, this Fontenot is putting all of his chips in the Michael Penix basket now. Like, if this doesn't work out, he is done. And it's not even going to be that long for it not to work out. That, if it's like Cousins plays a couple of years, he's so, they bring Penix in, and Penix is clearly not the answer. It's going to be out the door for him. I mean, I don't really even think that there's much to question there. And all I go back to with the Packers when they did it for Jordan Love, like, you're really excited you have Jordan Love now because he's played really well in his like first official full year. But also, that pick didn't give Aaron Rodgers anything to try to win a championship when he was there those final couple of years with the Packers, when they were losing, in the NFC Championship game, an extra player that could have helped them get over the top. And that's one thing when you're picking Love at 25 or 26, wherever he was taken, but at 8, they could have taken the top defensive player in the draft on their board, and they're just like, nope, we want our backup quarterback and quarterback of the future. I don't know.
Yeah, because that's the other thing is, those Green Bay teams were still very good very complete teams at the time, so it was not a luxury pick because they weren't Super Bowl winning teams, but they were in a better position to make a move like that versus, like you said, Atlanta picking top 8 for was it 3 straight years, basically.
Yeah, it's the 4th year in a row that they were picking top 8. So yeah, I mean, I guess maybe they'll be right and they won't be picking that high ever again. Good luck to them. I can tell you, picking in the top 8 is better than picking at like 16. So if Cousins comes in and he's awesome and you get to the playoffs and make a run, that's awesome. But like, if they just improve from being a 7-10 team to being a 9-8 team and barely scraping the playoffs and get knocked out right away, it's not going to feel any better. That's for sure. But we can kind of segue that into the fact that they could have taken the top defensive player. The next 5 picks could have taken the top defensive player. There were 14 players that were offensive players taken to start the draft. It felt like almost like, the draft was on a wheel, that we had done, and it just kept landing on offense or something. 14 in a row seemed wild, but I do think it said a little bit about what the defensive prospects were in this class. There wasn't a ton of blue chip top tier guys, or if there were concerns with injuries or different aspects of their game. Were you surprised it took that long for one to go off the board?
I don't know. It was tough because, you don't want to play the need game when you're talking about the draft. You want to, go with your player evaluation, but, you look at Atlanta skipped it on defensive player at 8, which was like kind of a shoe in.
Sure.
9, you had your Bears picking Rome, which I don't think anybody faults them for doing that.
Nope.
But it's like, the Vikings, they needed a quarterback, that traded it up. The Jets need offensive line help so bad, even though they signed 2 starters. Morgan Moses, they're both 33 years old, always injured. So like that's so I am not so sure. I mean, so the first pick that was like, okay, offense is viewed a little higher than defense was probably with the Oakland Raiders.
Sure.
That was a team that we
Yeah.
talked about, like a Quinyon Mitchell or a Terrion Arnold, or even like one of the edge defenders going to, and then they went with tight end Brock Bowers. So
After all the QBs were gone. Like it was,
yeah,
oh, we're not
exactly.
gonna
Well, that's the other
QB.
thing. Yeah, if there was a quarterback left, they would have went with quarterback. And
Yeah.
then, the Saints, they needed to tackle so bad. So I don't necessarily believe it's totally on the evaluation of the class. I think
Sure.
it was a lot of teams in the top 15. They missed out on those positions in free agency. Because remember, we talked about when John was on, can you name the free agent tackles from this past year?
Right.
Not really. So we saw a lot of tackles go off the board, and a lot of
Right.
teams need tackle. Tackle
Yep.
help is something that is always needed in
Sure.
the NFL. So I don't necessarily believe it is a complete dearth of talent at the defensive
Sure.
on the defensive side of the ball. I just think a lot of teams in the top 15 were just drafting for need, which, maybe that's why those teams are drafting the top 15. Some of them year over year, they are just
Yeah.
going after need and not taking the best player available.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's also something to be said about the fact that you can't win in the league without offense. That to win in the NFL now, to compete and try to win a championship, you have to have a good offense. That having a good defense would be nice. It's a plus, no doubt. But the real winning, I know the classic phrase is defense wins championships, and don't get me wrong. I mean, Steve Spagnuolo and the Kansas City defense was a huge reason they won a Super Bowl last year. But that is a team and a defense that's kind of been assembled with later round picks, free agent pickups, later rounds or late in the first. But like when you're in the top of the draft and there's these premier offensive players available, you got to strike because you need to be able to score points in this league. And all the NFL is doing is adding more rules that prevent the defense. For a long time it's pass interference. Then you got horse collar tackles, and you got helmet to helmet hits. Now you have the hip drop tackling. Yeah. So there's just more and more reasons to be like, all right, we got to just make sure that we can score points, because even with a good defense, the likelihood is you are still going to surrender points every game. The days of the 85 Bears or the 2000 Ravens, these defenses that just absolutely smother the offense, I think it's kind of leaving now. So
yeah, even like the Legion of Boom, the Seahawks,
absolutely.
when they had their title runs, it's I hate to say, but like it seems like with the departure of Bill Belichick from the league, like is there that ability for a defense to solely like I think Belichick's Super Bowl win over the Rams was like his like Mona Lisa. Like I think that was like honestly his best coaching job ever.
Sure.
And if he wanted to go out on top, he would have retired right after the game was over. But are we ever going to see anything like that ever again? Spagnuolo comes close in Kansas City. Vic Fangio, he's been bouncing around from team to team the past couple of years and really hasn't found that same magic that he used to have.
Yeah.
Jim Schwartz has seen a resurgence in Cleveland, but unfortunately that hasn't led to much success when it comes to the playoffs. So
right.
And like we say, every coaching hire, like who are the names? It's anyone who's had coffee with Kyle Shanahan or Sean McVay. It's basically it's all offensive guys.
Exactly.
And a lot of that stems back to when your offensive coordinator has a lot of success, they're usually the first ones to get head coaching jobs because franchises want consistency on the offensive play calling side.
Right.
So that's why offense is, it all comes from the top, basically. That's why offense is pushed so much recently, as far as I could feel.
Absolutely. And even I think the lesson was learned mostly by the Chiefs, but even the rest of the league did watch the Buccaneers beat the Chiefs in that Super Bowl, and they said like, oh, if Patrick Mahomes doesn't have protection, he can't even win a game. That like getting offensive line help is essential for even the best quarterbacks. And there's just enough laid out there evidence wise that says like investing in the offense probably makes a lot of sense. So it doesn't stun me or anything. I actually was a little surprised. Latu was the first of the defensive players to go, not because he's not a good player, but I just think the medicals were a little suspect. And so I wasn't expecting of the first defensive player to go for it to be someone that has actually retired from football and then came back. But I mean, it shows how good of a player he is that the Colts went with him at 15. But then there was a run of, a good amount of defensive players that came off the board. By the end of the round, I think it was 22 or 23 offensive players. So it was very offensive heavy. And the end of the round is where we had a run of like 3 or 4 wide receivers to finish off the round 2. So it was kind of all offense. Then we got a good amount of defense, and then all offense again at the end. Was there a favorite landing spot for you for any of the prospects in the first day or first 2 days, I guess?
We got to start off by talking about our boy Quinyon.
Absolutely.
Quinyon Mitchell, cornerback 1, Philadelphia Eagles. He joins a room with, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, Darius Slay,
Yep.
James Bradbury, veteran guys who have had ups and downs kind of on the downswing. And he definitely is in a position where he won't be relied upon immediately to be a producer.
Yep.
But that's how Philadelphia drafts all their defense. Look what they're done with their defensive line. They drafted Nolan Smith in the first round last year, and he didn't really have to do too much because of the players around him. And now he enters year 2, and he can take a step forward. And they just build that rotation when it comes to both the front end and now the back end on their defensive unit, because we saw they also took advantage of some value in the second round. They were able to grab, Cooper DeJean, Cooper DeJean. I don't know. Apparently the pronunciation's changed in the past week. It was always frustrating. We spend 5 months talking about these prospects in our own little scouting bubble.
Right.
And then NFL Network is like, oh yeah, it's Cooper DeJean. I'm like, oh great.
They get the inside information too. That
exactly. So I really love that. I want to talk about the quarterbacks again, but Bo Nix, I think Denver was his best landing spot. I think him working with Sean Payton, if anybody's going to get the most out of Bo Nix, I think Sean Payton is the best. As far as the type of offense he wants to run with, Nix and his limitations when it comes to arm strength and stuff. So I'm pretty excited to see how that Broncos offense looks this year with Nix under center. I don't believe there'll be much of a competition between him and, Zach Wilson or any other quarterbacks in that room. I think he wins that battle pretty easily.
Absolutely.
And then I'm trying to think real fast. I mean, who stuck out to you? Best fits. Day 1, day 2.
So I really like the Olu Fashanu pick for the Jets. I was kind of preaching a long time about how I kept seeing, the Bowers to the Jets, a Dunze to the Jets. Maybe they'll trade back and take Brian Thomas. I just look at the Jets makeup, and I know having the boogeyman for Bears fans, Aaron Rodgers on their team, that he can make any wide receiver seem relevant, that he can make stars out of guys that are mid-level wide receivers. But he needs to stay upright. And it's a guy coming off an Achilles injury. He's 40 years old. You got to protect this guy. And the Jets need to make sure that they're building up the offensive line. That's essential for their team. I loved Fashanu. I thought he kind of started off pretty high in the draft, scouting process. And then he slipped a little bit. There was talk about his run protection versus his pass protection and what he needed to work on, and that he wasn't complete. And I just think that the build and the footwork that I saw from him look like a guy that's going to succeed at the next level. He's a big guy, big arms, long reach. I just think it's a really, really solid place for him to go and have success early. And I think the Jets are going to be better off for making that pick instead of, trying to force some sort of pass catcher there. A second round guy I really liked, Jonathan Brooks going to Carolina, is super interesting to me. I know we were really low on this class with running backs, but he went in the second round, pretty early second round for the most part. And his competition that he's going into of Miles Sanders and Chuba Hubbard is not a ton to be really afraid of. And I think about this in the fantasy perspective, right? That a couple of years ago, that 2020 draft, right? We had all of those different backs that went Clyde Edwards-Helaire, DeAndre Swift, Jonathan Taylor, Cam Akers, all those guys go, right? A lot of those guys were drafted right in the Jonathan Brooks area. This commitment to where he was actually picked is pretty good draft capital for the most part, especially in a class that was being touted as not great at running back. I like the fit. I like the chance for him to go in there, be a starter right out the bat, and give the Panthers a little bit of a different look and dynamic, because Bryce Young needs that terribly. So I liked that landing spot as far as kind of like the earlier day two. I know there's a lot of different guys that have been talked about on all the other shows, but those are two that really stood out to me that I don't feel like are being talked about all that much, that I think are really, really solid picks.
Yeah, and then also another thing we talk about is like, players who fell in today
Mm-hmm.
too.
Sure.
Like you got Johnny Newton, Jackson Powers Johnson, Cooper
Mm-hmm.
DeJean that we talked about before. Like, these are all players that we consistently had mocked in the first round that we find, falling into the second round. And that's why we talk about a lot. Like we're not privy to interviews, to medicals and stuff like that. And that affects, a lot of the evaluations that go into these players. But we'll have to see how those players perform this season, and see was it maybe a different evaluation than we had, or was it just something behind the scenes that we don't have access to, and that's why those players wound up in the positions they did wind up to. I do got to shout out Rutgers, New Jersey native Max Melton, second round pick, cornerback to the Arizona Cardinals. That one was a big hoo-ha-ha at work. We had a couple Rutgers alumni working in the building. But it was just very, very interesting draft this year. I mean, honestly, like one of the more interesting draft classes that I've seen in a while.
Yeah. And I'll go away from a pick I liked for the Panthers to a pick I didn't really care for. And that's first round pick Xavier Legette. I know that we have talked kind of off the show about what his skill set is and why I don't prefer it out of a draft prospect. But there's just like a lot to that pick that's very kind of whatever to me, and especially trading back, into the first round. I know it was like one spot, but coming up into the first round to take him, it's a guy who did not really have all that much success. You tweeted about it, Dan, prior to his final year, and they just took Jonathan Mingo last year, who reminds me a lot of like a similar game to what Legette does. I just don't understand the pick all that much, especially with some of the other guys that were still on the board, at least as wide receivers. I know Adonai Mitchell was off some teams' boards, so maybe that was the case. But like even Ladd McConkey, I think would have been a more solid pick for them.
The next two picks were Keon Coleman and Ladd McConkey, who I think I'd both rather have over Legette.
Absolutely. And I don't know. It just felt odd. I know, David Tepper's busy going into restaurants and telling people to stop telling him what to do, but this felt like another Tepper pick or something. Like it was just a very odd pick for me that like this was the first pick after a pretty awful season and the first pick of their draft that they were going to try to start the process of fixing Bryce Young. It just didn't feel like the guy that I would feel like is the guy that a young quarterback is going to rely on or build off of. Like, I guess if you want to have end arounds and you want to have, different ways that you use them in your offense, that's fine. But like a Ladd McConkey makes more sense to me, because don't you want to have a guy that's a reliable receiver, finds ways to get open, finds a soft spot in the zone, is able to beat man. That feels like the guy that you want, a shorter, young quarterback to be able to find on the field. I mean, Adam Thielen had a huge year actually with Young last year. So I don't know, wasn't crazy about that pick.
I'm honestly more excited for Jatavian Sanders on that team as a pass catcher,
absolutely,
than I am Legette.
Absolutely, 100% agree with that. Another one that kind of stuck out to me that I wasn't wild about. I thought he'd find his way into the first round because of the testing numbers, but Chop Robinson to Miami when he went to Miami, I thought was a little rich. They have, Jalen Phillips, Bradley Chubb, Shaq Barrett already on that defense, guys that, can rush and get to the quarterback. And there's guys like Graham Barton and Jordan Morgan and Tyler Guyton still on the board for offensive linemen. Quinyon Mitchell was still on the board. Terrion Arnold was still on the board. I just didn't really love the value at, I think it was 21, taking Chop Robinson there, because I think you're hoping that, from Penn State, he becomes, a Micah Parsons kind of guy, but he's not the same player at all. And I think it's a little rich to take him that high personally.
I agree, and also the other thing is, you mentioned, Bradley Chubb and Jalen Phillips, like, we have to remember, like, they suffered season-ending injuries at
Exactly.
the very end of the season. They're not gonna be back until probably Thanksgiving. So
Right.
now you're drafting Chop Robinson, who is someone who I assessed as very athletic, but also
Hmm.
very raw and needs time to develop.
Yep.
So now you're gonna be asking him to step in as your
Right
day
away.
one, like, number 1 pass rusher. Like, it's a big
Hmm.
ask of a kid, and it kinda sets him up for failure right away.
Yeah.
It's just gonna be putting a lot on his plate, instantaneously. And like you said, there were a ton of other players that could have helped the Dolphins, way more,
Yeah.
taken after Chop.
Yep.
And, like, yes, they have a hole at edge defender, but, I think they would have been better off just firing a couple darts,
Sure.
day 2, day 3, and then there are still veterans out there that could be signed,
Exactly. Exactly. I think when it got to the 15th pick and there was literally not a defensive player off the board, and they're like, we want an edge defender, they were like, oh my gosh, we're going to get one of these guys. This is going to be great. It's like then Latu, Dallas Turner, and Verse all go within the next 5 picks.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it felt like a reach for me. I'm not against what Chop Robinson can be, but I think they could have probably traded back near the end of the first round. And obviously, this is all like perfect world scenario. You have to have a trade partner that wants to come up, all that stuff. But yeah, not crazy about that pick. Was there anything that stuck out to you as far as like a little bit of a reach for you, or not
Um,
your favorite?
so I know we talked a lot about Tyler Guyton as a player that we like.
Hmm.
And he's getting end of the first round hype, but I'm not so sure that Dallas is the right spot for him.
Agreed.
He's kind of like Chop. He's another player that he needs to develop. His highs are very high, but he also has a lot of lows in there.
Hmm.
And Dallas is going to rely on him now as a day one starter,
Yeah.
pretty much. I believe on the left side of the line as well, which is
Yeah.
historically the harder side to fit in. So I don't know. I hope that Tyler can develop to be
Yeah.
the player that we think he can because we like him.
Yeah.
But I like Chop. It's very difficult to ask a player that needs development to just step in day one and be like, hey,
Yeah.
you're the guy, you're protecting Dak's blind spot. Like, good luck, basically.
Yeah. It's an interesting all in that Jerry Jones has put out there for this offseason. Not a lot of moves as far as free agency went. They take a developmental offensive tackle in the first round, and the running back that they're going to have probably starting next year is Ezekiel Elliott returning now. So just very, very, very interesting the way this has kind of played out. And it does beg the question of, are they going to let Dak walk at the end of the 2024 season? Is there any players that went kind of like day 3, later rounds that really stood out to you as being like, oh, I kind of like either that landing spot or just kind of happy to see, them go to a place where they're going to have an opportunity?
Yeah, so I already mentioned Jatavian Sanders, the
Right.
tight end from Texas, who went at the top of the 4th round to the Carolina Panthers. I think he is going to be maybe a more effective option than even Xavier Legette is year one.
Yeah.
He's a player that I don't know why. I mean, we were texting during the draft weekend. I'm like, why is Sanders? I mean, I haven't heard anything since then,
Yeah.
whether it's off the field stuff or medicals, but
Sure.
I think it's a great value getting him at the top of the 4th round.
Yeah.
And then another player that I really love to see was the CFL corner, Quantez Stiggers. He was CFL Rookie of the Year last year. I forget exactly why he went to the CFL, but something with college eligibility and
Yeah.
not playing enough, so he had to go that route and then come back to the draft. But to see him get selected in the 5th round to the Jets, kind of a low pressure situation. He gets to, sit behind Sauce and, learn a bit. And it's a cool story. And, I'm just always a fan of cool stories when it comes to the NFL draft.
Yeah. A cool story that I thought, just a guy that you don't, or a school that you don't typically hear from, South Dakota State's Mason McCormick going in the 4th round to the Steelers, was a really fun one for me. I secretly really liked the Steelers draft. with
I
McCormick.
was gonna say I think the Steelers probably had one of the Steelers and Eagles, two Pennsylvania teams, probably had the two
Yeah,
best drafts.
I haven't heard a lot of people talk about the Steelers, and it's kind of surprising me because like between McCormick in the fourth, Fatanu was 20 overall. They took Zach Frazier in
Mhm.
the second round. You're rebuilding the offensive line with those three picks really nicely, and then on top of it, they get Roman Wilson, who's now destined to be an unbelievable wide receiver because he went to Pittsburgh,
Mhm.
and Peyton Wilson, who fell and fell and fell because of I think he only has one ACL thing. But on this podcast, having one ACL is not a problem. So
Right over
that's
there.
never going to be anything that we're going to knock down. But like, it just felt like every pick was like really value and in a spot that they could use it. I don't know. I loved their draft. I thought it kept every time they came up on the clock and took somebody, I was like, dang, nice pick, nice pick. And when you bring in two quarterbacks in Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, who are, combined like $6 million or something like that on the cap, and you get all of these different offensive linemen that you're going to put in front of them, it's like, hey, you're actually giving yourself a chance to maybe make some noise if one of these guys can do something. And the Steelers were not far off from being a playoff team last year. I mean, like, this team is somehow, some way, always in the mix. I don't know. I really liked their draft. I really thought it was fun. But McCormick, especially in the fourth round, I think it's a guy that nobody really knew what to do with exactly with where he had played and the competition he played against. But I really like his game, and I just think going to Pittsburgh is a really, really nice landing spot. And then later in the sixth round, Kamani Vidal from Troy went to the Chargers as a sixth round pick. Only running back that they took. So he's going to be competing with Gus Bus. And then until J.K. Dobbins gets injured, then he'll take over there. But I just think there's a chance for him. Again, another guy that played at a smaller school, maybe not as known. There's a chance for him to get an opportunity to play really, really early on based off of what the personnel is there. So I don't know. I kind of liked it there. I think it's a good spot. Can you hear me, Dan? We may have lost Dan. So
Yeah, sorry.
you're,
Sorry, I'm in and out, in and out.
you're all good. You're all good. So yeah, I just think there's a lot of guys that ended up going in these later rounds, though, that it's like kind of hard to fight through and find those values. They were talking about it a lot, that this is kind of one of these years where a lot of different players were sticking around one last year of the COVID years, or the least amount of third year players that come out in draft, like in the last 10 years or whatever of the draft. That these later rounds were not as fruitful, or the picks weren't as valued. So kind of an interesting way that all went down near the end of the draft. And it did feel like there wasn't as much movement to me later in the draft. But overall, I think a really interesting year. Obviously, the Penix pick is going to be the one that we will remember from this draft and think about. But I did want to mention with the quarterbacks, there were 6 of them in the top 12, right? And all the talk was that the Vikings were going to trade up. They were going to trade up. They were going to go get McCarthy. And then McCarthy ends up going as the 5th quarterback, and 2 picks later, Bo Nix goes. And it kind of stuck out to me that like there were a lot of quarterback needy teams, but no one really had the same grades once it got past the first 3. Like, I think if Nix was on the board and JJ was on the board at 12, there's a chance with the way the Broncos have been talking that they still would have gone Nix. So just interesting to see how that all had played out in that first round for sure.
Yeah, and real fast, I just want to mention undrafted free agent fits.
Mm-hmm.
Leonard Taylor from the University of Miami, who you got to remember preseason was talked about as a first round talent at the
Yep.
defensive tackle position.
Yep.
He winds up going to the New York Jets after the draft is over. He gets to sit behind Quinnen Williams, who I think is like the perfect player for him to emulate his play style. So it's kind of like not too many people cover UDFAs and stuff like that, but I think
Right.
that was a great signing both by the Jets and then for Leonard Taylor, just a place where he can sit and develop and maybe resurrect his career after having a rocky pre-draft process.
Absolutely. I thought there was a couple interesting quarterback signings in the UDFA area. Like Sam Hartman, I thought was actually kind of an interesting one going to Washington after they had taken Jaden Daniels. Like it seems like a spot where he could probably grow into that backup role pretty nicely. So I kind of like that landing spot. There was a number of different guys though that that gap from the quarterbacks that really stuck out to me too. Because it was after Knicks, it took until, was it the 5th round finally when Spencer Rattler finally went off the board to the Saints, which just felt kind of crazy. Like there was this rush, like 6 picks, or 6 quarterbacks taken in the first 12 picks, and then nobody until the 5th round.
I think NFL Network reported that it was the longest like gap between quarterbacks ever, and I think it was like 197 picks or something like that.
Yeah, I'd heard some sort of report from Ian Rappaport that was the teams had said to him, the documentary he had been on, the QB1 show, like rubbed teams the wrong way and stuff. And I'm like, man, you're really judging a kid based on his junior and senior years of high school and how he's acting, huh? It kind of seems like he's acting like a 17 or 18-year-old to me, but maybe I'm just a guy that works at a high school and like sees that every day. So just kind of interesting. But yeah, I think overall interesting draft. Everybody got better. Everybody's going to go win the Super Bowl now. So I'm really happy that every team gets to win the Super Bowl next year.
That's great for them. That's great for them.
Absolutely.
Just closing thoughts. We said this last year. I say it every year. The actual draft is almost bittersweet because we spend almost a full year with these prospects. Some in the scouting community spend even longer. I know Dane Brugler recently says that his draft guide, the BC, spends 18 months per draft class, which means he's already 6 months into 2025, which is crazy. But it's it's so special for us, especially I've been working so intensely the past few years is talking to these players and seeing where they go, seeing where they develop, and it is very bittersweet as we say goodbye to one class, but at the same token, I already ordered my notebook on Amazon. 2025 class starts very soon, and it's just like it feels like we have another Christmas present to open.
Absolutely.
We're done opening our presents, and now we have secret presents hidden away that we get to start unwrapping.
Sure.
All spring and all summer.
Absolutely. I think the toughest part is the pre-draft process feels like it goes on way too long. Like I'm like, man, the draft just has to get here, and then the draft ends, and I'm like, well, go play games now. Like I don't want to wait anymore. Now I want to see how you do. So it's going to be a long few months before we get to see these 2024 picks actually go out on the field and prove who is the best and who was a good pick. But I'm just excited because it's a whole new leaf of prospects we'll be digging into for 2025, but also getting to see all these guys we scouted and watched for a long time finally hitting the field and seeing what they can do at the NFL level. It's going to be a fun year when they are finally out there. But I think that pretty much wraps it up for this draft recap. I'm not really a guy that likes to go into grades or anything. I think it's kind of pointless, but I'll give everybody an A because everyone had fun. So that's my grade for the draft.
I think the metas get everyone a B plus. Like you don't want to be too optimistic. Like
it's
done this.
It's the safe route. Like I mean I think they could have done more, but they weren't terrible. So that's everybody gets a B plus. That's a good call.
They should have traded back more, got the same player.
Exactly. So, but for Dan, I'm Tim. Thank you for joining us. Please make sure to like and subscribe on the YouTube page, and we'll be continuing to bring out all sorts of content throughout this off season. We're going to be getting into the dog days of summer soon, and so there's going to be a lot of different things that we dig into before the NFL year kicks back off. So make sure to like, subscribe, stick with us, and we will catch you in the next episode. Thanks, everybody.